Hello, everybody, and welcome to another video. If you're familiar with the channel, you will know that we sometimes do podcast-style chats with interesting people from the hobby, whether they're painters or creators of some kind. And we're a little bit different today in that we've kind of got a bit of a channel exclusive because we're here with two wargaming rules creators. Because today there is a brand new rule set out aimed predominantly at the Wars of the Roses, the greatest period in wargaming, as we all know, and that lovers of this channel and people who watch this channel will be familiar with. It's called Test of Resolve, and it's been developed by these two fine gentlemen, David Knight and Tim Couper, who are here now. It's available at the link below, and we'll talk about that, how you can get hold of it in a moment, what it's all about, and we'll go into that. But first thing I like to do with anybody on the channel who's into the hobby is to find out how they got here, and I'm really interested to get into conversation with these two guys about how they came to develop a Wargames rule system, because I've never kind of delved into that with someone before who's created a rule set, so that's going to be interesting. But David, tell everybody a bit about yourself and where you are in the world, and what your sort of interest in the period is.
So I'm David Knight, and I've been a wargamer for more years than I care to remember. I started wargaming in England, currently based in Scotland, but I started wargaming with the Washington War Games Club down in England in the late 70s. Moved up here about 20 years ago to Falkirk, and have been wargaming predominantly historical periods, but also a bit of science fiction and fantasy as well ever since. My interest in medieval history goes back to the Ladybird book of the Battle of Agincourt. So I've been interested in reading about history, and then collected war games figures, and played various games. So it's a long-standing interest. I would say the medieval and ancient periods have always been my primary interest. And within that, the Wars of the Roses stands out.
Now, and not far away from you lives Tim. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. I live about 20 minutes away. We met up here at the Falkirk District War Games Club, which is a very active community which really fosters the gaming world in this area. I moved up here about 6 years ago from the London area, and I developed an interest in wargaming in the 1980s, really discovering Fire and Fury, which is, you remember, which coincided with my other interest of reading military history. Most of the time when in England, though, I played solo games, but would go to shows looking for historical miniature rules which are good to play solo and which gave me what I considered fun. And I really wasn't very fortunate in finding that lots of rules, not much fun. But my work in the software industry, my background is I was a software consultant. I traveled to the US particularly. So I regularly traveled to the US. And so I timed my visits to coincide with war game conventions there and visiting American Civil War and War of Independence sites. So while I was there, my real interest actually is in running games, especially multiplayer ones, and seeing how the gamers make decisions and interact, as well as the experience of seeing the narrative unfold on the table. The US Wargaming Convention style has really enabled me to express this interest, and I've regularly gone to Historicon for more than 2 decades and had a blast running a couple of games each time. That's the US connection for me.
Great. So how did you meet then? How did you originally come across each other? Because out of this friendship, hopefully a really successful rule set has been born, hasn't it? So you created something together. How did you first get to know each other?
Well, so Tim, as you said, moved into the area and found the club. Tim actually ran at the club on one of our Monday night sessions. He ran a World War I East Africa game, and I'd never played the World War I East Africa game, so I was interested in taking part, and enjoyed the experience. Tim was looking to get some people together to play his style of games that he likes, and so started going over on an occasional basis to start with over to Tim's house to play. So it was very much a sort of a game-based start to it, and the Falkirk Club was the venue.
And we'll get into the mechanics of the rules and why they're interesting in a moment, but why are you both interested, particularly in the Wars of Roses period? Because I know you're both big fans of it, like me. So, Tim, do you want to start? What really fascinates you? Why did you get into it?
I think I got into it because actually it's David's interest. I'm interested in actually seeing games unfold realistically on the table, playing historical battles in any period is my interest. And my actual experience has been in horse and musket, in the horse and musket era from, English Civil War up to early World War One. And I haven't had a little bit of ancients, but not much in that space, because I haven't found a rule set that actually is fun to play with. And it's certainly true that I haven't found one on this side or the other side, the Atlantic, for America's, I haven't found on one either side for the Wars of the Roses, which is quite interesting because there has been an amount of interest shown in that, but there aren't games that somehow play them. And I think it's because the scenarios, the real world scenarios, are quite difficult to game. But that is like a red rag to a bull. It's a real challenge because David had some really good ideas, and he's the guy who should talk about this really. He had some really good ideas about why these battles worked and what the nature of warfare was like, not in a micromanagement way, but in a way which was quite different from the way it's often perceived, and it just spiraled out of control from there. David, have you more you'd like to say?
Well, yeah, as I say, I've played a lot of ancient and medieval games, and I've played some Wars of the Roses games, actual recreations of battles before, and I was always left dissatisfied because most people play. In fact, I think almost every game out there is based on a long period of time. It's based perhaps some of them go from 3000 BC to 1500, so if you're trying to play something like Bosworth or Houghton or whatever, you're trying to fit within a framework that covers that. And of course, probably the more well-known period is the 100 Years' War with its English longbowmen, and most rules make them really effective, which isn't unreasonable. If you then transfer that into the Wars of the Roses, where both sides had longbowmen, and the average standard probably wasn't quite as high, because in the 100 Years' War, these were probably the cream that went over to France to fight, whereas in England, in the Wars of the Roses, it was who you get hold of and grab by the scruff of the neck to come along to fight in the battle. So A, they weren't as effective, and B, they cancelled out. But in almost every rule set I played, they basically ruled the battlefield. So
it's a common problem, isn't it, actually, looking at other previous rule sets, is that the longbow is probably too powerful in a lot of cases.
It is. And it's not actually a decisive weapon, because what it can do is it can make the enemy react to you. But at the end of the day, every Wars of the Roses battle was actually concluded by people bashing each other over the head with sharp instruments, the melee. So that's what made me want to do it, I think, more than anything else, because I wasn't satisfied. If another rule set had worked, I would have probably been happy, but none of the other ones did. And Tim has been involved in some playtesting of rules, so he has a way of looking at it from that angle, and I've sort of feeding ideas, and then Tim often shapes them, has his own ideas as well, of course, and that seemed to work quite well. But the Wars of the Roses has always been an interest, and the other great thing is there's so many battles. There's a lot of different things that happen in those battles, which Tim alluded to, and so to actually do those and recreate those was a challenge I was really up for.
And Tim, do you want to go into a little bit about if you could paint like a little pen picture for people about what sets apart test and resolve, if you could sort of summarize it in a few sort of paragraphs as to how it works and what sets it apart.
Well, let me start with what the design criteria were, because that will help to provide
Sure.
the framework for
which
that.
is really interesting, actually. Which is the first thing that when I read it was the criteria was interesting. So
Yes.
go.
So these things are all, let's say, equally important. The first was that the rules should reflect and encourage the nature of warfare in the period. Kind of obvious, but actually, as David says, the other rules don't.
Yeah, difficult to do as well.
So you set
straight up there.
criteria. Yeah. Secondly, the game should be playable with figure size up to 28 mil, completed in an evening, and playable on a 6x4 table. Those are the things you need to do. So because for the thing I hated going to the club, and you go to the club and you spend 3 hours playing the game, and you've moved halfway across the table and say, well, I don't know who won that, or maybe this, maybe that. And that's most unsatisfying. And particularly as a convention GM, you want the game to finish in 3 hours, whatever rules you're playing, and you want people to go away and enjoy themselves. So the other thing, the other design criteria were historical or fictitious scenarios must have a high degree of replayability. So you don't want a scenario and it just plays out the same as this is First St Albans and that happened all the time, because otherwise you get fed up. You only want to play it once. The nature of, there's been a class of rules which I've used and which I've play tested and developed and worked on, which are US set of rules, which have those characteristics. They want to be suitable for solo play and for multiplayer gaming. So it wants to be a good for a convention game, but actually lots of people are stuck at home and they can't play with anyone else like I was. And the high degree of replayability means you can have lots of fun, because actually you just don't know what's going to happen. You can't know what the tactics are like, because actually you didn't have much command and control of the game. But they've also got to cover, and I found this from David, things like continental and Irish mercenaries. You need to cover that. And then a strong characteristic, as I discovered from David, was you have unreliable commanders. So you've got treacherous commanders, you've got reluctant ones, you've got feuding ones. You want to include those. And so rather than just having, there's a special case, we've got a treacherous one here, and in this case, we've got a treacherous or a feuding one here. You make, there's a general rule, which you can then, if people want to play fictitious ones, they can have a treacherous commander or a treacherous unit or company in the game, and you can set your own game up. So you don't have to, you're not limited to the scenarios that we've provided, but you've got rules which cover that. Identity confusion also played an important part in problems. And again, we have rules for that. And because because of the settings, you have to have comprehensive but simple terrain rules. So you've got to cover defensive positions, towns and river crossings particularly. And again, that we covered all those things, made them general but simple, so that actually, you know, when you get to a table and you've got a river, you know how your troops need to behave to get across the river. And it's not difficult. You stop at the one end, you stop at the other end, and you get across. I mean, but that's how it works.
Sure.
So that's the first half of the question, I think.
But there are sort of several things, aren't there? When as just leading on from that, there's sort of immediate things that I spotted. So there are cards. There's a card-based turn system in there. There's a distinct lack of D6, which is interesting.
Yeah.
And there's no single figure casualty removal, and it's a reasonably quick moving set of rules for all of those reasons, isn't there? I suppose, is that?
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting because one of our goals is to make it lots of moving parts to work seamlessly and kind of intuitively. And I remember we asking, well, could we do this with just the D12? Because the D6 is not enough, and 2D6 is, well, that's okay, but could we actually just use one dice, because D12s roll really quite interestingly. And so we said, yeah, okay, so what else can we do? Well, how about bad things happen on a 1? So, okay, so here we go. So can we make that as something generalizable within a melee? So what happens in a melee if you roll a 1? What happens and you have counter rolling in melee, so that there's all sorts of opportunities. And then things like, how do you give it a big, strong period feel where you're fighting in a mass? You're not fighting as individual units like regiments. You're actually in a big mass. And so how do you encourage the gamer, or not mandate the gamer, but you make the rules such that if you don't fight in a mass, you're in trouble. So how do you do that and retain a sensible atomic unit or thing, which we call a company, to be able to do the actual fighting? And the way that we've dealt with things like isolation, we put things in the rules which mean you really have to behave that way. Also things like have 3 battles. So the idea of a battle being a command, and having those fighting against the opposite one until they get rid of them or the other one runs away, a morale type thing. So all those mechanics are built in, and they're not complex. And that's really surprised me, that, you know, because it's really easy to write rules with lots and lots of complexity. So you need to have, you need to be able to be a lawyer to understand them. It's not about that. It's about, it's obvious that you would behave that way. It's kind of intuitive.
Intuitive,
so,
yeah.
But I know you found, Chris, haven't you? I mean,
yeah. At this point, we should say that we do all know each other, because I'm one of a handful of lucky people who you sort of plucked off the internet to ask if they would playtest before publication. So we've had several Zoom games, haven't we? Between Scotland and Nottingham, we've had some cracking games over the last sort of few months. And if you buy a set of the rules, you'll see that you might, and you follow this channel, you might see a few photographs in the rules which are familiar to you. You've got some pictures of my mentions in there as well, which is very kind of you as well. So just getting on to that, how did you go about, because a lot of work has gone into this rule set. I mean, it's been really interesting to sort of see get a hint of what it takes to really refine something to the point where you're happy that a number of people are going to like it. Sorry, David. So how did you go about that? You know,
I think one of my mantras has always been, let's try it. So I would come up with ideas, Tim would come up with ideas, and we'll just try them. You know, not try and prejudge how well they work quite often. So we've been through numerous iterations of the rules, which, you know, obviously over time those.
How much time are we talking now? When did you first draft something of a skeleton sort of set for this? How long ago are we talking? How many months are we in development now?
We started the idea. It must have been October 2019.
Yes, I think something like that.
And because David having described the nature of the sort of games that we're looking for, we thought that the card-led way of doing things means you can introduce events you need asynchronous, basically. You must have some asynchronous process to make this happen, but it doesn't feel weird at all. But it's I go, you go doesn't work, basically, for this. And it was we started using something around that, and we found that we had a rule set. In fact, the horse and musket set, we see, well, could we tweak that backwards in time? And the answer was kind of yes, but you needed so many changes, it was crazy. So after about 10 months of that, we knew the bits that we wanted to keep, but we had to chuck everything out, all the mechanics out. A lot of it we removed and kept the bits we wanted and started from scratch again. That was the D12 moment and that kind of stuff. And so that was July 2020.
Yeah, I'll be right. Yeah.
And then so we got after within 6 months, we had the rules sorted out by January, and they haven't changed much since January. But but we wanted to make sure that we play tested all the scenarios which appear in the 2 scenario books, one of which is available now. The other one's going to be published in the next 2 months, so that we have all the scenarios and we know that the rules work for those.
Yeah,
which are the test cases.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Tim, because excuse me, I was saying we tried lots of things, but also in trying to just have a set of rules which would allow a battle to develop historically without forcing it. But I don't know, probably one time in 3 or 4, it comes out fairly close to the scenario. Come out fairly close. Excuse me. By doing that, that gave us lots of different challenges. How do we make this work? How do we make that work? And those, as Tim said, part of them partly it was a matter of coming up with ideas that we could then generalize into the rules. But also it was often actually refining the fundamentals as well. And you know, if so that works well here, would that work well generally? So I think you know, the fact that we've been locked away and in pandemic conditions has given us a bit of focus, and we've been able to meet probably a couple of times a week, playing this or I say meet virtually a couple of times a week, and we would you know, sort of be in touch a fair bit outside that as well, just bouncing ideas backwards and forwards. So so yeah, that's it's been trying it and discarding or keeping, and then you know, might get to discard again in 2 months' time and something else come in. Just keep on iterating until play tests pretty much work without any change. You might get a single idea out of it, or none at all, as you get through it.
Now we've gamed a number of times, and you've played a number of times with other play testers. So and it's fair to say that the pretty much the bulk of all this work has been done during the pandemic, and you've used Zoom really cleverly to play test with different people in all parts of the world. So would this have happened without the pandemic?
Not as quickly, I don't think.
Forcing it to happen in a way. Is that fair? Yeah.
I mean, Tim's a focused man. My brain tends to wander. So I doubt. I mean, if I'd been playing at the club on a Monday night every week, then I wouldn't have been playing Test to Resolve on a Monday night every week. Yeah. So I think it was almost like a crucible to help focus, and but there's an element of that. I think once you've got to a certain stage, there's a real desire to see it through.
Yeah, once you've taken it so far, and
you know, you really want to just to get it out there and see what other people think of it as much as anything. You know, it's actually quite a nerve-wracking business, being you know, the rules being out there. Will there be loads of praise, or will there be loads of people casting aspersions at us? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, speaking from some experience, I find that generally the sort of the late medieval sector of wargaming, if you like, they tend to be a very friendly bunch. I'm sure it's going to be very well received, because particularly in Wars of the Roses, people just are really grateful for attention on the period, aren't they? Because as we all know, there are many other periods that arguably get more attention than Wars of Roses. I'm not saying it's an unpopular period, far from it, but it's probably not. It's not number one in the wargamers' mind, in most wargamers' minds, as it Wars of Roses. It's probably 3 or 4 in lots of people's minds, but it's not. It's rarely number one when you think of wargaming, is it? So, Tim, when it came to devising the basic system and getting around some of the challenges, what was difficult to get right? So what did you find a challenge to make? Is there a particular mechanic or part of the rules that were hard to crack?
No, I think we very early got the card deck sorted out, and the mechanic worked fine. I mean, using the ideas from the field of battle really helped, because there's a lot of completeness in that and self-consistency. The difficulty we had with my original thought had been to just make this a period extension, moving it backwards but it didn't work. Well, it probably would have worked, but it would be really difficult, because you'd have to buy the field of battle rules, then chuck half it away and do another half. It's crazy, right? So in a sense, I felt once we'd in that first 10 months, once we'd had ways, we cracked all the problems in that 10 months using that other rule set, basically. So all the difficult pieces, no, not well, some of the difficult pieces, being able to get into melee and getting the archers at the right level was fine. But once you're there, I think it's been much more straightforward. And I think we've just had lucky breaks. We've had this inspirational idea of, you know, why do you use a D12 or some the format of how figures should lie on the table. Couldn't get them on a 6x4 table because we had them originally, the figures in a line and we based them like this, but it doesn't matter about the basing, but we had them originally like this, okay, on 28 mil.
Yeah.
Which meant that actually trying to get 3 battles side by side was really big. But actually, and I remember saying to David, I was just saying, what I really like to do is to do that and put them like this.
Yeah.
See? And it's like, well, that's obvious, and that solves the space problem. And it's like, it's just because I just said I want to do it, and it wasn't like we were wrestling with a big problem. It just happened, and that has been, I think, it was an instrumental thing in giving you your company unit, which enables the battle to flow nicely. The battle unit, I mean, the command to flow, and to move to engage in a really elegant fashion. Things like, well, there's lots of bits of the rules I could bore you with. So, but it's one of the things I would say is that very early on, we agreed how we were going to partition the work, because it is often difficult for 2 people who are very different to work together, and particularly as he speaks a foreign language, because he's Geordie. And I come from Yorkshire, to be fair, but I don't sound like it. But nonetheless, so he said, I have the final say in the rules, and David has the final say on the scenarios, which is why you'll see the rule book has got by Tim Couper and David Knight, and the scenario books are by David Knight and Tim Couper, because although we both contribute to
not quite like Ant and Dec.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah. So that really helped in terms of working together.
Yeah, I think that's worked really well. The one thing, just the one extra thing I would say is the thing that I struggled with the most was actually getting the mechanic right to do what I said at the very beginning, which was to allow the archers to come forward and shoot, and that to be important, but not to be battle winning, and then for them to fall back and the melee troops to come through, and that to be the crux of the game. And we did have a number of iterations of that before we actually ended up with where we are. So that was probably, in terms of having to go around the circle, that was probably the biggest one. Mm-hmm. But having said that, I think there's a number of areas where we started with one idea, as I said before, and then changed it. So it's been quite dynamic.
Mm. What I found really interesting, is watching you both work and talk about the rules as we were playing them and that sort of stuff. And you, Tim, you just said it, is that you are kind of noticeably different in some ways. And that's quite interesting, because I often find that when I've met, not many, but when I've met some other wargamers, they tend to just hang around with other wargamers that are exactly like them. But just because it's easy, because they're going to agree more often. Mm-hmm. But you two seem to sort of use your differences as a strength to sort of build the rules. Do you want to touch on that a little bit?
I mean, I think, as I said once again early on, I mean, I just like wargaming. So I'm a gamer. I'm not much of a painter. And it's not false modesty, because you see lots of people say, "Oh, I'm a really bad painter. Let's show this magnificent work." No, I'm a paint by numbers painter. I enjoy research, but really what I enjoy is gaming.
Is the game,
and therefore I'm quite easy. I mean, I take people as gamers, and so I can play games with almost anybody. There's only been once or twice where, in, as I said, over 40 years of gaming, where I've felt like walking away from a war games table. So I'm quite adaptable, and Tim is, but I am, as I said, I'm a bit scatterbrained when it comes to working on something like this. Which, so I think one of Tim's strengths has been to sort of let me do my thing. I think that's part of it, isn't it? We each let the other do their own thing, and and don't try and be flexible about it. I don't know. What do you think, Tim?
No, I think that's right, and I think it's we just like any relationship, though, we rub each other the wrong way. I can be quite OCD. I'm a just to say, I'm a PhD mathematician, to give you some idea of the kind of problems that David's having to deal with. So you've got that kind of, which is why I generalize a lot, but I also see things too precisely. David's very good because he actually he just rounds the edges off and just makes it warm and cozy. The rules. I mean, rather than being this has to be true in all cases, and this doesn't have to be true in all cases, and you need both of those two things working together. And particularly, you just want something that's a load of fun at the end of the day. And it doesn't have to be exactly true, but the power of generalization, I think, has been a real benefit. And David's been able to validate them and say, yes, that works, and that doesn't work, chuck that out, but this does work. Well, how about this for an idea? And the fact that we give each other space to have ideas, but we're not precious about them. So if I think it's a really brilliant idea and David says it's rubbish, then that's fine. I'm cool with that, because well, I will. But if I think it's a really good idea, I'll go back to it again. And he will as well. And we've got some of good ideas as a result of that too. So
yes, indeed.
Just while you've been playing the games with me, kind of thing, I've noticed that you genuinely listen to each other. When something comes up and you're trying to think about how to resolve something, whether or not you've come across a snag or have come across a snag, not sure, and you've kind of given each other's view of it. You genuinely, both of you genuinely listen to each other, despite being in some ways different, which I found that really interesting to see at close hand as the rules have sort of gradually being developed, I suppose. Tell us about like the play testing, because do you know roughly how many different people have played how many different games to get to this point, all via Zoom as well, pretty much?
Well, we know how many people have been involved in the play testing, because they're listed in the front of the rules. Let me just see here: 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 13, 14, about 15 or 16 have been there. About half of them come from the US.
Quite a cross section as well, isn't it?
Three come from the UK and one come from Brisbane. So that's the sort of set of people who've been playing, and we've had groups working together. But it's usually the downside of it's been there's only probably been 2 or 3 people who've played the rules without us being there, and that's been really quite difficult, because I think it meant that there are things that came out from those which you haven't got someone to explain, although, to be fair, they didn't find it too difficult. So it wasn't like it was catastrophic. It's just, it would have nice to have had more data about that. But nonetheless, the folk who joined in were all many of them were rules writers. My American friends are rules writers and GMs. So they know how games work, and they made really good suggestions about why did you do this, and why did you try this mechanic. So we got lots of good input as well from people who are friends and very skilled in this area. So
but I mean, so that was Tim's lot. I think some of the other guys, particularly the more local ones, are just ordinary wargamers. And they are people who and a couple of them in particular, more used to the sort of the art de la guerre type of gaming, or the sort of gaming which perhaps is a bit more towards, I sometimes call it the chess end of the spectrum, where you've got a lot of control. In Test to Resolve, you do have some control, but there are also things outside your control. And it was quite interesting. I mean, there were a couple of times when we were sort of grinning, sort of manically saying, yes, fine, but really we think, no, this is a lot of rubbish. But actually, when we went back and reviewed it, we still changed some stuff, So it's been a real mixture of people, and I think the thing that's really pleased me is that I haven't heard anybody not want to play a game. They've all said yes, I would absolutely want to play again. So there's something working well there, I think.
Definitely. Now, I'm curious to know what you made of my involvement, because I'm a little bit different in that I'm a relatively new wargamer. I'm only 4 years in. I'm still relatively young by wargaming standards ish. You take the average age, I'm probably still under it, just about. But I'm also I'm getting 4 years in. I'm getting used to knowing what kind of wargamer I am, and I suppose I'm I am a bit more of a painter and collector than I am a gamer. Although I love to play games, I couldn't not play games. I love playing the games. But I'm also known for being terrible at maths and being quite aggressive. as in, or reckless with my tactics. So was that deliberate that you wanted to find somebody terrible at maths and reckless, or was that purely accidental?
that was a bonus, Chris. That was a bonus.
Yeah, it's just an added bonus. Yeah.
but I think it is having that spectrum of different people. So you were a particular somebody who wasn't as, I think you were probably the least experienced of all our playtesters.
Must have been. Yeah.
But having said that, you've got a keen interest in the period, and you would try probably compared to some of them, you would try things. You would say, well, I might try this, I might try that, and that's sort of testing the boundaries of the rules is really important, because if Tim and I play, we know how it's supposed to work, and so we play that way. Somebody like yourself who is coming to it fresh and perhaps a more limited background of different rule sets, you would say, well, why can't I do that? Why can't I do this? And that sometimes we had to change the rules to include that, or sometimes almost change the rules to exclude that.
Yeah.
So that well, you could, but it would be daft to do that. So yeah, I mean, I think just reiterating the point, it was good to have that full gamut of different types of gaming.
It's not that it would be daft to do it. It would be not the way that it was fought in the period. That would be the thing that would make us legislate for it not to happen.
Yes.
Yeah. To be clear.
Yes. Oh, yes, absolutely. What I really mean is we've tried to construct the rules in such a way that using period tactics is what gives you the benefit. Mm-hmm. So if you want to send somebody, if you think this particular unit should go on a force march, 3/4 of the way around the battlefield, that didn't happen in the way that it might say in Napoleonics or something, where you would detach units for tasks. Yeah. Generally, either people were kept together, or occasionally a unit might be detached, but in the scenario situation, we give them special rules so that they can do that. So, it's been really interesting.
Well, one thing I've noticed, whether it's deliberate, is that it seems to be a rule that if you make a decision of any kind, whether it's to move somewhere or it's to engage certain social unit in such a way as part of that melee system, the melee going on, and if you try something a little bit different, you try something, you tend to know what the result is quite fast. So you don't have to wait several turns to work out whether or not what you've just decided to do is going to have any effect. Quite quickly. Is that deliberate?
Yes, I think melee resolution. I think it's important from the point of view of keeping the game time down. You want melee resolution to be resolved fast, but actually it can possibly, some could drag on. So you get big masses together going on for ages, but some could be done quickly. And so you're not having to roll lots of dice to try and find out how many people have lost and that kind of stuff. It's one thing tells you either there's been something happened or nothing's happened.
Yeah.
But you get through the melee resolutions fast, basically.
Yeah.
Yes. You roll a dice. There are a few factors to consider, but most of them are fairly, once again, intuitive. If you've got plate on, you're going to be better than somebody who hasn't got plate, that sort of thing. Once you've played it once, I think, you hardly have to look at the table, because it's, as I say, it's pretty intuitive.
Yeah, and so it is.
And you keep on fighting. You can get a draw, but you generally keep on fighting until there's a resolution or somebody decides to disengage. Therefore, if you've got a block of 3 or 4 companies fighting each other, that probably will last 5 minutes, something like that. Perhaps slightly longer, but not much more than that. So it is quick, and that's, as Tim said earlier, we wanted it to be. We wanted to get resolution. We didn't want it to drag on forever. I
think the point is, you're wanting the person who's playing the rolling the dice needs to spend as much time having to make decisions about things which he can change or she can change, rather than I rolled the dice to see, now I'm an up one for this, or I've got a decision point to make. Am I going to melee with that person or not? Once I've decided I'm going to melee, let's get the melee done, because I want to get to my next decision point, which may be to move on or something else. So you want to spend most of your time dealing with the decisions as a commander or as a leader of some sort.
Sure.
Yeah.
And it's turning into, despite being a pandemic, you could argue with the release of these rules, it's turned into quite a good year to be a Wars and Roses wargamer, I think, surprisingly, because we had Nevermind the Billhooks came around, which is obviously a completely different kind of system, which has proved really popular, and it's piqued an awful lot of interest back in the period. And then people like myself and Gareth Lane have kind of half piggybacked on that, in that we're doing World War Roses event on May 22nd, where we're encouraging as many people as possible, whatever their rule set, to play on the 22nd of May, to almost celebrate the kind of lifting of lockdown in some parts of the world anyway. And then we've got Test to Resolve coming in. So is it a good time to be a Wars Roses wargamer at the moment?
I think actually, I mean, you can almost trace it back to when the Perrys released their plastics, because that was one of the earlier plastic sets. You only need a couple of boxes to be able to start in the period. And I think that generated a certain upturn in interest, but people were just using the same rules, whatever they might be. Anything from line rampant, as I say, to after like air or whatever. I think when both Billhooks came out, I thought, oh, is this just going to be exactly this? It was never going to be exactly the same, but how close will it be? But as you say, it's a totally different set.
Completely different, yeah. We should make that clear, shouldn't we, to anybody who's playing Billhooks? Crack on, because it's a really good rule set, but this is a completely different kind of rules.
It is indeed.
Totally different, because Billhooks is very small scale. It's got lots of sort of the things we were talking about, which are, although they might be quite playable and quite fun, they're probably arguably less historically accurate in some ways. So you've got lots of sort of small units sort of working as individual units with certain weapons and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And
but obviously
Test is always a lot more involved in a historical point of view, isn't it?
Yeah, I would definitely say that. But once again, it means that a lot of people have gone out and bought a lot of Wars of the Roses figures, which can only feed into, we hope, can only feed into people having those to use for our rule set.
Yeah, there's a lot of people over the last few months that have got interested. So now is a good time, I think, to be in it, and certainly to be having a crack with the rule set. Why not? Yeah.
I think it's interesting that some of the play testers we hadn't played War of the Roses before, but they were experienced gamers or GMs. And one of their comments was, because we've laid the scenarios out chronologically with a history around in the scenario books, you actually get the flow through the period 1455 to 1461. And the history of why this took place, and then what follows on. So you then understand, actually, you learn about the Wars of the Roses, and you play the game. The next game is first at Albans, and then I'm on to somewhere else, and then I'm on to somewhere else. And that makes it quite engaging for people who don't know the period well, or might know the period well, but for those folk, it just means, oh yeah, okay, now I know what's going to happen. Next, we're going to go here, and here I am. Lo and behold, here I am.
So you can play through.
You play through the whole.
Yeah, that is attractive, isn't it? Yeah.
So we're releasing at the same time as the rules. The first, as Tim said, which take you up to Taunton, and then you go from Hedgley Moor, I think it is, to Stoke Field, the last battle that we cover. So yes, in two doses, you go through the whole period.
Brilliant. Well, I think you've done a tremendous job, both. I would say that. I'm a bit biased, having seen you develop it over the last sort of 12, 18 months or so. And congratulations. I think it's a fantastic set. It's been hugely fun to play and involved. And I think people are going to really enjoy it. I think it's a good time for people that, if they're interested in the period and they're maybe getting up to a bigger collection of figures, having started with something like Billhooks, this is a really interesting place to go. So if you want to get hold of a copy, check out the links below. But thank you, David. Thank you, Tim. And we look forward to playing.
Yeah, just going to say, the softcover versions can be bought from our website or direct from Amazon, but also available from our website.
Yes, there is a Test of Resolve website as well. It's not just something you can pick up at Amazon. Yeah, we can get it direct from there.
But also from that site, you get the PDF versions and the specially printed cards.
And the cards.
And bundles, discounted bundles of these with the shiny books.
Yeah, it's a very well put together set of rules with lots and lots of options as well. So enjoy, everybody. Thank you both very much. It's lovely to meet you both, and it's been great taking part in the playtesting. And if you're watching this, it's a good time to be a Wars of Roses wargamer. So take care, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks very much, Chris. Bye.
Bye.